Hey, it's Susan Ortolano here, relationship and marriage coach, and it is Thursday, the 11th of May, 2023, and I am here to talk more about invisible marriage killers. Last week I posted a video about it. I wasn't able to come in live, but I posted a video about the second one because I was doing like part 1, part 2, part 3. Honestly, there are several things that are sort of invisible that can really take down a marriage, but I wanted to bring forward 3 just for your awareness and to kind of share with you what you can do about it, because the last thing we need is something invisible taking down our marriage, right? I mean, it's like some of the obvious things that kill a marriage are obvious, you know, the poor communication, the arguments, the betrayals, the lack of intimacy, all that kind of stuff, but there are these things that you cannot see, especially right away, that will take down your marriage, and you're sitting there going, I don't even know what happened. So we're going to talk about that today, but first, I always like to do a card message, and I have actually 12 card decks, and I really prefer the ones that are, you know, some of them will have like number 50 with a photo, and then you're supposed to go, what does that mean? Or you're looking it up in the book. I may bring some of those to future lives, but right now there are 2 of them that I like to use. And this one, the card, as you see me shuffling, the message for you today is reflect on your truth. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't really take the time to really reflect on their truth. You know, people get so busy with what's happening in their external world, and this goes so perfectly with what we're going to talk about today. People get so busy focusing on their external world that they don't take the time to really look inside and reflect on what is true and what feels right for me. And a lot of times in a marriage, you've got certainly 2 different, points of view, and you have your own point of view, your perception, your truth, and your spouse has theirs. And it's so important for both of you to be able to understand what your truth is in any given situation. And sometimes that requires time to reflect. So if you're not reflecting on your truth, this is a good time to do it. I know we are in May, and May is generally, depending on where you live in the world or in the U.S., I'm in Southern California, so, you know, it's like, I don't know, 80 something, what I know, it's only 75 degrees today, but it's going to be like 80, getting into, you know, warm weather, bright, sunny, all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people want to be out, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, oh no, let me out. We just went through winter. Well, here in California, winter's a little different in a lot of places, and so we're out all year long. But taking time to reflect, even if it's a daily practice where you literally take 5 minutes and reflect on you, your truth, and not, you know, your mind chatter is going to keep going. So the whole thing about quieting your mind is a little bit of BS, because your mind's going to continue to go. You can just really focus on the intentionality of your thought process and just allow your truth to come forward. So many times we are like moving around and like not living our truth, and when that impacts a marriage, it's super painful, because you're either going to be the one resenting your partner because it's always their way or the highway, and your truth does not come forward, or they just don't even know what your truth is because you haven't taken the time to really reflect and share, so that they're doing things in a way that just doesn't land well for you, doesn't resonate for you, because you haven't really reflected and you haven't really shared. So these are some things that are really important, and it's perfect card, and I did not pick this on purpose. I shuffled because we're going to talk about the 3rd invisible marriage killer. That sounds really like a bad movie, right? But we're going to talk about, you know, these things because these are things that seem invisible, that are hurting your marriage, and often you don't even know what's happening. So just to recap, the first one I talked about was your energy centers. Your energy centers can throw you completely off balance in so many ways, to the point where they start interfering with your marriage. And if you didn't watch that one, I keep everything in the featured area so you can go back and watch. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week, I did a video, I pre-recorded a video, And it was really about the invisible beliefs, perceptions, the limiting beliefs that we all have that sit really below the tip of the iceberg. You know, we only see what we can see in our conscious mind above the iceberg, but we have these subconscious root level weeds in our psyche and in our consciousness through our belief system that often we're not even aware of. And that, unless we allow it or learn what we need to learn to bring them to the surface so that we can clear them, then they're going to wreak havoc in your marriage and to yourself too, because, you know, false beliefs and inaccurate perceptions can not only destroy the marriage, it can really take a toll on you as well. So the third one I wanted to talk about is what I call the growth gap. And, you know, obviously we're here in life to learn lessons and grow. Some people really take a surface level approach to living where it's all about, you know, I want to find my person, I want to have a nice car, a nice house, a great job, make some good money, travel, all that kind of stuff. And those are all great things. I'm not saying don't have that, of course. But if you don't take a deeper dive into who you are, how you think, what you believe, if you're not mindful and aware about what lives and what lurks on the inside of you, and learn to grow from that, because this piggybacks on what I talked about in the video that I posted, then what happens is one person may intentionally do that and the other person is not intentionally doing that, and then the marriage goes like this. And suddenly one person, I'm going to give you an example too, one person is super committed to their growth for whatever reason, and they start going inward and they start becoming aware of those things, the subconscious things that are living at a root level, and then they start to grow through them. They often get help for it, and they're able to grow through them. They're able to learn techniques to clear them, and they start becoming an elevated, more ascended version of themselves. And if the other person is not doing the same, certainly we grow and evolve whether we like it or not, or at least we're given the opportunity to. But if the other person is not being intentional about it, this is what happens. And I call it the growth gap. And it, you know, again, yeah, we're going to still grow at different rates, even if we're intentional about it. Like my husband and I are very intentional about our personal growth, our spiritual growth, all that kind of stuff. But we're more like this. You know, sure, there's a little bit of gap, or we may take different approaches. Sometimes we do the same types of techniques and you know, take the same actions or learn very similarly. And sometimes he may have an interest in one way of doing it while I have an interest in another way, but we're still moving along like this, right? And so that is one of the things that really brought us together, keeps us together, keeps us in a really good place in a marriage, because we are very intentional, very conscious about personal and spiritual growth and development. That was one of the things that was a non-negotiable for me when I was single again and I was seeking partnership. Non-negotiable. I could not be with a man who was not intentional about his growth. And I had that experience in my first marriage where I was really trying to grow. And certainly, I mean, I was in my 20s and I had a lot to learn. We all did. But I was like this with my first husband. And part of what happens when the gap gets too wide is the marriage starts to die. You know, I'm going to just put it like that. It's like a plant that's not getting watered. It starts to die. And couples can no longer sometimes really relate to each other, understand each other. There's often, you know, incompatibilities that start to happen when there once was like total alignment. And even the desire to connect and be with each other often changes. The person who grows intentionally might look at their spouse in a different way, maybe in a more parental way, because they start to feel, you know, more aware, more mindful, more conscious about things, and they're doing things and they're taking action steps and working through whatever trauma, whatever issues they've had, letting go of those limiting beliefs because they've learned some great techniques while the other person's not. and they sort of not look down. And I've had that situation happen with couples where somebody was looking down on somebody, and I'll share about that. But just the viewpoint and the ability to align just changes. And the person who's growing sometimes looks at the other person and sees that big gap and can't really connect or relate in the same way. And it's not even like having different interests where it's like, oh, one likes football, the other likes baseball. It's not like that at all. It's a lot deeper. It's a lot different, because when you are growing, however you are growing personally, spiritually, you are just going to be shifting as a human being. And your core values may shift a little bit. Your non-negotiables may shift a little bit. The needs that you have may shift a little bit. And your desire for a partner who's not growing with you just becomes less and less and less. And that gap gets really, really big. So yeah, I got notes, so I'm looking at them. So that beautiful connection that was once there, where you felt totally in alignment, you know, you had the mad chemistry, you were absolutely in love, and you were really sort of at the same pace, kind of becomes out of reach and creates a lot of conflict and so many other things. Because two people can no longer connect at the same level. And for the person who's not growing, if they see their partner behaving so differently that they feel less than, because they see their spouse, you know, behaving in a different way, in a more, we'll say, sometimes I'll say mature, where they've just grown so much that they, you know, things are happening differently in their life. They're behaving differently. They're feeling more peaceful. All kinds of stuff are really going their way, and the other spouse is still on the struggle bus. It can cause resentment on both sides, not just for the person who's growing, but the person who isn't intentionally growing, watching their experiences not be as positive, not be as great, wondering what the hell's going on. I don't understand, and can actually feel less than or not enough. And we don't want that to happen either. So this affects relationships emotionally, spiritually, physically, with intimacy, because the person who's growing, again, it's like they're seeing their partner in a more parental way. And so the intimacy starts to wane because the desire is just not there. Now, somebody who's growing intentionally will often try to bring their partner along. You know, it's like, gosh, you know, and bring it forward, because they're very intentional about it, meaning they're very aware that they're stepping into growth and they're growing, and they want their partner to stay with them, so to speak. So they'll bring different things. Oh, I read this great book, or I've been working with a coach on this, and this, that, and the next thing, and I realize I've had this awareness, and the other person has a hard time even being in that conversation because it's very foreign to them. And you don't want to have that. You don't want to have anything become a chore either in the marriage, where it's sort of like, you know, the expectation is for the person who's growing is that their partner's just not going to be at their level. And I don't want to say that from a place of ego, but it is a reality in the growth gap, where it's like somebody feels like, oh gosh, they're just not, you know, behaving or communicating in a mature way or in a conscious way. And because they've stepped into a more mindful way of being, it becomes really frustrating. And again, it's just as frustrating to the other person as well, because they will feel less than or start getting resentful towards the person who is intentionally growing. So now we have the other type of growth where the person, I don't want to call it narcissism, but I'll call it growth narcissism or spiritual narcissism, where somebody is growing and growing, but they're growing really more from an ego place. So they're looking down on their partner, and they're really thinking that they're more superior because they've done all this growth, and they think they actually have grown. And in some ways they have, but it's like there are some people who will do a lot of growth and again think they're superior, think they're better than, and that is what I call spiritual growth narcissism. And that's not healthy either, because there's going to be such a resentment from the person on the other side of it. The other person, if you really want to call it authentic growth, it's really not. It's really, sorry, I'm getting messages here. It's really a form of a narcissistic type behavior. I don't want to diagnose it as narcissistic personality disorder. I just term it, spiritual growth narcissism, where they just feel more superior, and then they're looking down on their partner, and they're putting down their partner for not being where they want to be, thinking that they're better than their partner, and that's going to cause a lot of resentment. So that is a different kind of growth gap, but the one person who is growing, who thinks they're better than the other person, the growth isn't always authentic. The growth that they think they're having, again, starts to hit their ego, goes into a pride space. Pride not being I'm so proud of myself, but pride being I'm coming from ego. And that's not what we're looking for either. The superiority is so painful for the other person, and the inauthenticity of the growth does not serve the person who thinks they're growing either, if that makes sense. So how do you deal with all of this, especially when it's not always visible? Because this is another thing that starts off as an invisible situation where somebody just starts to feel better and lighter, and they're intentional, and they're doing all these things, and even reflecting on their truth, and it's not always a visible process because it happens internally. So what do you do when it starts to come forward to the external place in the marriage where the communication is not where it needs to be? It's poor communication where there's somebody communicating consciously because they've done the growth on that and they've learned how to do it. Maybe they've worked with a coach and they've learned how to communicate consciously, and the other one doesn't. The other one is communicating the way that they always did, which is like blame, putting it on the other person, projecting things on the other person, not sharing, withholding, shutting down, saying things. And I shouldn't even say this. I have a stepbrother. I have a couple of stepbrothers, but I have a stepbrother who is just like that. Doesn't grow, but he chose a wife who doesn't grow either. So they're a good match, so to speak, in terms of living at the surface level. But when he is interacting with me, who is very much on the growth path, he gets very, I don't want to say it from a narcissistic or egotistical place, but he gets very childish, I would say, where he'll say, fine, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. When I'm trying to deal with something from I'll say, more conscious space, he has a hard time doing that. And part of what happened was, and this happens in families too, right? My mother passed away, gosh, almost 2 years ago to the date, May 21st, 2021. She was married to his father, and his father died 6 months later. My biological brother and I took care of them, and we were in charge of everything and all that kind of stuff. And my stepbrother didn't want to be in charge of anything. However, was all about the inheritance money, was all about making my brother and me wrong for not, him feeling like he didn't have choices, where it was all about what we wanted. No, it was really about what was in the will and taking care of the parents when he wasn't doing anything. So there are some things left from my stepfather's passing, and this stepbrother of mine does not communicate with my stepsister, and my stepsister does not communicate with my stepbrother. They don't talk to each other. They have their reasons. They don't talk to each other. But there were some things left over from my stepfather's passing. We had all, my brother and myself and my nieces, and we had all taken the things that we wanted, and we left certainly my stepfather with his things, and we thought that would go to his kids and grandkids and all that kind of stuff. So they're not talking to each other, and we have a friend who lives in the state where my mom and stepfather live, who has been holding on to these things for them. And there's such an argument because they won't talk to each other about where this stuff is going to be sent to. It's absolutely ridiculous. My stepsister is a more conscious person, but and she's very big into growth, but she just can't deal with her brother. And I have a hard time dealing with my stepbrother because he's got a lot of anger issues. He spurts things out. He's not very conscious of his language and his way of being. So he'll just, come from ego and everything's unfair to him and all that kind of stuff. And the only thing I ever said was, you need to get with your sister. You guys need to talk about the things that are, left over from your dad and decide, what things you want. Well, they just can't seem to do it. So it happens in families as well. But how do you deal with it in a marriage where this is supposed to be your safe haven, your safe place to be, the person that is the love of your life, the place where you can be your most authentic self, and suddenly you have this growth gap and things really start to change? Well, the first thing is you got to communicate. And it sounds so cliche, and there's so many nuances in communication that most people are not aware of. Most people don't know how to consciously communicate with their partner. It really takes a skill set reset because the communication skills that most people learn are not very effective. So that's number one, is you want to consciously communicate with each other, share what is going on. You've reflected on your truth, right? It's time to share your truth. And there's a way to share your truth and sit down and have a very conscious conversation. And I know there's a whole thing around, I get so many wives who say, my husband doesn't listen to me. Well, there's a reason for that. It's not that men don't listen. Men just don't have the brain wiring set up to listen to long conversations. It's not that they don't want to listen. That's a whole different Facebook Live that I'm probably going to do a teaching on when I do a 3-day, it's not all day, but I'm going to do a challenge. It's going to be like an hour for 3 days. And there's going to be a Zoom room where people can upgrade and be in there and get more coaching and questions and answers. Anyway, we're going to talk about that another time. But, the check-in, how many times are you checking in with your spouse about the state of your marriage or what's going on with you? A lot of people are like ships passing in the night. They're so busy with kids or, working their careers, the things that they're involved in. And, let's be honest, people get really tired and people don't always care for themselves well. So there's definitely a need for that. But people get so preoccupied about that they don't check in with each other and say, how are we doing? How are you doing? What's going on in your inner world? What's going on in your outer world? Here's what's going on in my inner world. Here's what's going on in my outer world. Most of the time we talk about the outer world, but we don't always talk about what's going on inside of us. And then to say, how are we doing as a couple? Hopefully you've set a vision for yourself or you've set goals for your marriage, maybe annually I recommend maybe on your anniversary or the beginning of January. And these are not New Year's resolutions. This is who we want to be as a couple this year. This is what we want to work on. This is what we want to accomplish. These are some of our goals. And it may be to take a vacation, but some of your goals may be internal goals that will really enhance the marriage and take it to a deeper level. So having that conversation about where are we in our growth process, where are we in our marriage, people don't do that unless there's a problem. If you intentionally sit down and say, you know what, one Monday a month or one Saturday a month, we're going to sit here and talk about the state of the union or the state of our marriage, what's happening internally, what's happening externally, and really get into deep conversation about where your truth is, what you're absolutely experiencing, feeling, what's going on for you, what is coming up for you, what's been getting triggered, how do you want to work through things. Having that communication will so positively impact the marriage and can take that growth gap and bring it back to synergy and alignment, which is where you want to be, because then you're opening up and you're sharing and you're being vulnerable and you're kind of sharing where you are and you start getting really intentional about it. There are ways to do this communication process, or what I call the State of the Union meetings, meetups together, where the questions are, you know, designed to really take it to a deep place. And it's one of the things that I do with couples. Certainly have an intention to both really grow together or take the actions that you need to intentionally grow. Everybody comes into a marriage with baggage, I'm going to call it that, or those limiting beliefs, or the trauma that gets carried at a subconscious level. And a lot of people don't take the action steps to heal, to grow, to let go, or to even learn how to let go. And then they carry it right into the marriage, and it impacts the marriage, as I was mentioning in the video last week. But for the intention to move through all of that and be very intentional with your partner to say, gosh, here's where I need to grow. And your partner says, here's where I need to grow. Great. How do we want to do that? Do we want to do this course? Do we want to work with this coach? Do we want to read this book? And reading books are great, but if you don't implement anything, what is the point? It just gives you like awareness. It's the same thing with everything. If you go and, you know, take some kind of action and you don't implement anything, then the growth isn't going to stick. So you want to do something that is going to be consistent, repetitive, something that you do. It's not like you know, you go to the gym and you think you're going to work out once and lose 50 pounds. No, that's not what's going to happen. This is a growth workout, so to speak, and it's intentional, and it's there to up level the marriage and make sure you're moving and growing at a similar pace so you don't have that gap. So the growth gap, when it's narrowed down, creates more beautiful communication, creates more intimacy, a stronger bond, a stronger foundation, and ultimately a marriage that's going to last and be really, really good. Now, it doesn't mean that there's never going to be a disagreement on something, but when you are intentionally growing and you know how to communicate consciously and resolve conflict consciously, then you're going to stay like this and move forward and grow from the obstacles, or grow from the conflict, rather than go, oh my gosh, my spouse, blah, 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 and start complaining to your friends, which is one of the worst things you can do. So this is an invisible marriage killer, and it often goes unnoticed until you start to notice something different, or there's distance noticed, or one of you doesn't feel as connected. It could be the growth gap, and so it's something that you really want to look at. If it's something unfamiliar to you, that's when you want to get help. Because if you don't do this, and sure, there are couples out there who, you know, are married for 50 years or whatever, and they didn't intentionally grow, but they just lived their life on the surface. They didn't take the deeper dive, and I'm sure I know they've had their share of issues, right? So if you're somebody who wants to really keep your marriage in a really nice flow of growth so that you guys can stay aligned together, some couples just stay together miserably because they don't take these actions. But it's really hard to do it on your own, and that's why somebody like me is available, because it's one of the things that I help people do. So, you know, I've worked with a lot of couples. I've been doing this for a long time, but this one couple, I'll call them Mark and Britta, they were not connecting. They felt the distance, and they had a lot of arguments, and they weren't sure what was going on. They couldn't really put their finger on what was going on. So Britta made a decision. Her father had passed away. She made a decision to go seek help for the grief. And it wasn't just grief therapy. It was like a lot deeper than that. And she realized that as the grief was coming forward, as she was working on it, there were a lot of other things coming up as well. And that had her start to be really intentional about her growth. Certainly grief is a horrible thing to go through. I've gone through it in the last couple of years in a very deep way. Certainly my husband's parents have passed away. You know, obviously we're not 25. My husband's parents passed away. I've had uncles pass away. It's like every year, like somebody's died. And this year so far, nobody in our family has died, but I have another uncle who has pretty severe cancer, so we're not sure he's going to make it through the year. But my husband works for hospice, so he is sort of an expert in grief. He knows how to handle grief. He knows how to go through grief. But it has been a huge growth opportunity to go through grief, to be able to heal grief, and then realize some of the other things that need to be healed, that I needed to grow from, because growth never ends. It's not like, it's not like trying to lose 50 pounds, you get to your goal weight. You have to do the maintenance work, but also growth, you're always going to have things come up where you recognize, wow, I need to really let that go. This is something I need to grow from, so that it is a never ending process until the day you take your last breath, or the day, if you go, however that happens. So it is something that you're going to need to work on if you want to have the life you want to have. And sometimes people who are very much into personal growth feel like, this is really unfair. Why do I have to do all of this just to have the life that I want? Well, some people are here for the deep dive. Some people think they get what they want, but they really don't. They have a job that they hate. The marriage isn't working well. They don't get along well with friends. They don't have a lot of friends, or they just live a surface life and it's not very pleasant, but they deal with it. We often, when we are in pain, we often get so used to it that we just walk around with it, because, we've done that to ourselves. We don't heal from the pain, therefore we grip it like this. If you imagine like these fingernails going like this, if you do this, first it hurts, and then you start walking around with it, and then you start to get used to it, and you don't realize that you can do this and open yourself up to grow so that you don't have that pain anymore. So in the work with Britta and Mark, she really did a lot of work on herself, and then, that gap was happening. She was feeling lighter, more self-aware. She got through the grief more quickly than a lot of people do. Not to say that grief ever goes away, but she was able to get back to being, more of herself, and she actually grew more from the experience. And Mark wasn't striving for that kind of growth. He was more focused on growing his career, and was kind of even missing the boat on how to do that well, because he wasn't wanting to look inward. And even if you want to grow your career, if you want to have more money, all that kind of stuff, it still takes a lot of inner growth work. So fortunately, after not being able to figure out why they were struggling and what was going on with their drifting apart and conflict and all that kind of stuff, and Britta had unfortunately began to see Mark in a more of a parental way, because just the way that she was interacting versus the way he was interacting, she noticed the growth gap. But we were able to repair the situation, get Mark on board with growing himself, and he recognized, wow, I am carrying a lot of pain. I am carrying a lot of false beliefs that are really impacting not only my marriage but also my career. And so there were benefits to that work in his career as well, which is awesome. So, there were other tools that they got, other things that we did that were affecting their marriage, but that growth gap was, it was getting pretty bad, to the point where they were really facing divorce if they didn't do something to fix it. And the gap may seem subtle initially, but ultimately it starts to be very noticeable. And the reason I call it an invisible thing is because it really starts out in an invisible way. You don't know what the issue is that you can really pinpoint. You don't know why your partner is distancing themselves. You don't know why you feel like, there's a moat between you. You don't know why the intimacy is waning. You don't know why you're feeling the way you're feeling, or things are happening the way they're happening. But once you become aware that if there's a growth gap, there are ways to fix it. And yes, Often it requires finding somebody like me, who's a marriage coach and expert, to help you through it, to help guide you through it, to help open things up. And I'm somebody who has an inside-out approach to healing a marriage and fixing a marriage and saving a marriage to make it an amazing, extraordinary, conscious marriage. And a conscious marriage is one that has more growth and awareness and all that kind of stuff. And that is such a breath of fresh air for the people who have gone through it. Their marriages get to a place where they didn't know it can be that good. And certainly there are some people who, don't do the work. I can't do much about people not doing the work. If somebody doesn't do the work, they're not going to get the results. And if one person does the work and the other person doesn't do the work, that growth gap is going to stay there, and then somebody's going to have to leave. And so you don't want your marriage to have that big growth gap. You want to get the support you need, and I'm available for that. That's one of the things that I specialize in, is helping people who have a growth gap, healing trauma, healing all those inner things that are impacting the external space of your marriage, the intimacy, the communication, the conflict, all that kind of stuff, and even like not having fun anymore. So you want to be able to work through the inside and learn all the external skills so that you can have the marriage that you dreamed of, or something even better, because that is possible as well. Sometimes it's not about going back to the old days when things felt good. It's about creating something new and even better than you had when you first met. So that is what's available, and these invisible marriage killers are going to take you down if you don't do something about it. There are definitely things to pay attention to, your energy centers. And if you missed that, go to the featured area and watch that one, because that is something that, if you're not even aware that you have energy centers, or if you're not even aware of energy around you, something's going to happen and you're not going to really understand why. If you don't understand that there's an iceberg and that there's a larger iceberg underneath, like the movie Titanic, where they just saw the tip of the iceberg and they didn't know what was underneath, then you're in for a life of pain and a marriage that's not going to work out. And if you allow this growth gap to happen, if you're not mindful, if you're not paying attention to what's happening in yourself and in your own marriage, and if you don't reflect on your truth, then your marriage is going to fall apart, or you're going to stay together miserably. So I offer discovery calls, and these are free calls where we talk about what's not working in the marriage, what your dream is for the marriage, what are the next steps that you need to take in order to bring your marriage back together to thrive. And I'm talking to people who are not yet separated nor have filed for divorce. If you have separated or you filed for divorce and it becomes about winning your spouse back, I can give you some great referrals. It's not that I can't work with those situations, it's that it's just not my preference. I like to work with people who are staring down the barrel of separation or divorce, but they have not pulled the trigger yet, so to speak. And so things can be saved. And so the discovery call is for that. And if I can help you, I will show you on that call, I will show you exactly what that looks like. If not, that's cool too. I will give you some ideas, some referrals, some next steps for you to take, whether it's working with me or going somewhere else. So that is what I do on these calls, and it's an opportunity for you to become more aware of what's going on, because sometimes we just try to tune things out. We know they're not working well, but we tune things out and pretend that everything's okay, or we just walk around in anger and resentment and all that kind of stuff, kind of grumpy, or we shut down. You don't want to do that to yourself. It's going to wear and tear on your body. It's going to affect your work world. It's going to affect your family. Obviously it's already impacting the marriage in a negative way, but it's going to impact your very wellness, your peace of mind. So it is in your best interest to get the support you need, and I am grateful that I have a huge scope of tools that I bring to couples, and just even some of the little nuances that a lot of people don't even think about or consider. that will bring the marriage back together and have it thrive. So I always post my information, but I will say it's www.susanortolano.com/call. susanortolano.com/call. It'll take you to my booking calendar so you can book the discovery call, and that is free. And then there's an application to fill out so I can be prepared for you, know about your situation, because I know it's a little scary to talk to a stranger or somebody you don't really know and you're sharing all this personal information. I have people who will vomit all the information all over me. They no holds barred. They'll say, anything. And some people who just get a little scared. It's a little scary to face a marriage that is not where you want it to be, that is suffering from a growth gap, that is not doing well. It's very scary to have to face that because this is where you're living. This is you going home and feeling some kind of way about it that's not very pleasant, or even trying to avoid going home because it's so uncomfortable to be there. You're walking into the lion's den, so to speak. Your home should be your sanctuary. Your spouse should be the person that is the safest person in your life, and you want to be able to go into a home and have a marriage that is beautiful and extraordinary and amazing. Doesn't matter how long you've been married. So that is me for today, and I'm going to be back next week with another topic, and we'll be announcing the 3-day event that I'm going to be doing once I know the dates. And I still don't know the dates because I'm in process on working on it, but I do bring forward a lot of the things that I do when I'm actually coaching people. So you would get a taste of what that looks like. And certainly from these Facebook Lives and any video that I put in, you get a little taste of my philosophy and the way I like to work with people and what I stand for. And if it's something that you feel in alignment with, or you feel comfortable enough to book that discovery call and get the help that you need, go ahead and do it. So that is it for me, and I wish you an amazing weekend. My husband and I are celebrating 22 years on Sunday, which for a second marriage is really good. I think sometimes even for a first marriage is really good, but it's second marriage for both of us, and I say second and final. And I'm so grateful and so blessed that we've had 22 amazing years. So I wish amazing years for you as well. If you're not having them, reach out. Let's get you on a call so that you can have the marriage that you really dream of. Alrighty, bye now.